freelance infrastructure. To be honest, the skill set of editing and the ability to find clients are by far the most important things that you're going to do. A lot of times when people ask how to set up a business or how to start freelancing, you're going to get a lot of answers like set up a website, set up a legal entity in the form of an LLC, get business cards. But business cards aren't effective. You don't legally need an LLC, although it is helpful. And we already talked about a website. So you're already well on your way to everything that you need to do. Now, why do I say you don't need an LLC? Well, before I can answer that question, I have to lay a flaming hot disclaimer on this course and say this is not any kind of legal or tax advice whatsoever. I am not a CPA. I am not an attorney. I am not a lawyer. I really am still learning a lot of this for myself and don't know that much what I'm talking about. I am simply providing some perspective coming from my own history and what I've done. I want to give you some ideas and some things to move towards. So, opening an LLC, having a legal entity that is separate from your own person in order to make money with, can be very helpful. A limited liability company means that if you screw things up bad enough and someone sues you, they sue the company, not you personally, unless they can make an argument for suing you personally. But opening a business entity has some protections. That being said, you can absolutely freelance as an independent contractor with your social security number rather than a legal entity employee number. I have done it, and I know lots of people who have done it. I cannot provide any advice as to which you should do. I started off with an LLC right at the very beginning, and it was fine. My CPA is actually telling me now that maybe I didn't need to do that. So that is a thing that you should consider. Do you want to open a legal entity? Do some research, decide whether or not that is for you. Another big thing to consider, which you don't have to do, but is smart business practice, is to open a separate bank account and run the freelance business money through that separate bank account. Keep the business finances separate from your own finances. Editors don't have a lot of overhead. We don't have a lot of expenses, but if you start paying for a lot of stock images, or if you start paying for some upgraded gear, it would be nice to not only write that off as a business expense, but also to not have it impact your personal finances month to month. So I have had a separate bank account for my business that has consistently run all of my income and my expenses from the very beginning. I've not always been good at keeping them explicitly separate from each other. I'll run money back and forth a little bit when I have to. It's not the smartest thing in the world, but it's helped me a ton to keep the business and the personal finances separate, and I definitely recommend doing it. Keeping track of those business finances is something that you're going to want to do. I currently use QuickBooks. It's not very much money every month, and it really helps in automatic transaction organization and invoice management and in financial reporting. When you're not making a ton of money and you're just starting out, you really don't need to. The first 5 years I was working in the industry, I just did some Google spreadsheets, and I wasn't even very good at it. Invoices are also something that seem really intimidating until you realize that there is no universal formula. There is no correct way of doing it. Most companies don't even care what it looks like. You can literally just rip the template that I provided in this course or any other template from Google and just plug and play. The only things that companies need is their name in the invoiced section, your contact information to know where the invoice is coming from, a unique invoice number from you, which can just be an arbitrary list of numbers. Start with 0001 and then just count up. And then the listed service and the hours and the rate attached and the total amount invoiced. It's very, very simple stuff. Don't let it intimidate you. I remember being very scared of doing an invoice, and it turns out it's really, really, really straightforward thing. And people hype it up way too much and pretend like it has to look a very specific way and that people won't take you seriously if it's wrong. It's not true. I'm not giving you legal advice, but something that I had to learn that is really good to know is anytime you take a gig that pays you more than $600, or anytime you pay someone else more than $600, that needs to be written down in a report, in a W-2 at the beginning of the gig, so that a 1099 can be sent at the end of the year so that the IRS can have record of it. Be sure to send W-2s to any businesses that you're working with that pay you more than $600. And make sure that they know that it's their responsibility to get you a 1099. I mean, they do. If they don't, they're in trouble with the law. This might be one of the most pretentious things that I've said in this whole course. I don't like to toot my own horn that often, but this one is a really big deal. I have never had a client not pay me, and I have never had financial drama. And I know a lot of people who have. I really don't know exactly why it is that I have avoided a lot of like the financial pain of not getting paid or having massive payment delays. I don't know why I've avoided that and other people have had to experience it. I think partly I'm just really lucky, but I also do know that I have some business practices that I refuse to stray from because I know that they protect me, and I'm going to recommend that you do these as well. And hopefully you can have the same pattern as me of not getting in bad situation with the monies. You have a potential gig. You're in the beginnings of conversation and negotiating what you're going to do and what the money is, right? When you are presented with a potential gig, there is a lot of conversation that you need to make sure to have. Most new freelancers make the mistake of saying yes when they don't even know what they're saying yes to. It is important to ask a lot of questions. Now, when you're new and you're going to take free gigs anyway, so you're more than likely to say yes, it doesn't matter as much, but it's really, really good to get into the habit. And you may avoid getting burned and getting some scars by asking questions at the beginning. So you want to be very clear about what it is that they're actually asking you to do. What is the total scope? When they just say editor, what does that mean? Are you assistant editing? Are you synchronizing? Do they want you on set keeping track of data? Are they wanting you to color or do sound or do motion graphics or do visual graphics? What does editor mean? How big is the job that we're talking about? And how long is it going to take? Are we talking about 1 day or are we talking about 6 weeks here? You also want to try to understand the type of job that it is. Is this marketing? Is this corporate? Is this a short film? Not just that, but what kind of tone does it take? And what is the actual nature of the project that we're working on? And in addition, who is the team working on it? And what have they done in the past? In the same way that I've taught you to research the people who you're reaching out to, you need to research your potential clients. Who are they? What do they do? Are there any potential red flags? If you get hired by a YouTuber who has a reputation for not paying their editors well, you could have avoided that bad situation if you had just done a bit more research on what other people have said who have worked for this YouTuber. Sometimes that information is hard to come by, but you gotta at least try to look for it. Information is power. You want to get as much information as you can on the gig and the specifics of what they're asking you for, and the person who's hiring you and the company that's hiring you and their histories. All of that's established, no red flags, feeling good. So now we want to establish some milestones. We want to understand when I'm getting the footage, when a rough cut is due by, how many feedback sessions we're doing, when the final deliverable is due. We want a timeline to look at. And sometimes it's as simple as I'm giving you the hard drive as soon as you can possibly take it, and I want it back as soon as you can give it to me, or I want it done in 1 day. Sometimes it's really simple. Sometimes it's complicated with a lot of dates, but either way, you need to know what that timeline scope is, right? Okay, it looks like it's going to work out. You understand the history of the personnel and the team and the organizations, and there's no red flags. You're excited about the job. It fits your skill set. It's a green light. So the question then becomes how to talk about money and how to price yourself, right? This is a thing that scared me for years. And it's not something that I can solve in one course lecture, but I'm going to do my best to give you as much information as possible. Let me share as much information as I can. The first thing to consider is payment style, payment method. See, you could get paid by the hour, or you could get paid by the project. Sometimes the client already knows exactly how they want to do it. Sometimes they're open, and it kind of depends on your personal preference. It doesn't really matter. Some business people say that you should always do by the project, because if you do by the hour, you're selling your time. Whereas if you do by the project, you're selling your value. And there's definitely something to be said about that. However, when you're working with video people, producers often have experience in other forms of video. And it's not like they don't know how much work it takes. So like I got hired on as a freelance editor to edit an episode of a TV show, and I was paid a flat rate for it. But me and the producer together over the phone came up with what we thought would be a fair rate by doing the math on how many hours it would take me. They didn't want like in a stretching accordion timeline. They were on a really strict budget, so they had to keep me under a certain number. So they didn't want me expanding on tons of hours. He had a really good idea of how many hours it was going to take an editor to do this, because this was the third season on a show that he had hired dozens of other editors for. So this argument that getting paid by the project makes you somehow a more legitimate business and you're not selling your time only kind of works when it comes down to offering freelance creative services. Ultimately, I've done hourly rates and I've done project rates, and both are fine. It just kind of depends on your preference. It depends on what you want to do in general, what you feel like experimenting with this time even. The next thing is you're going to want to do some research as to how much is realistic for you to charge. If you have some information behind you on industry standard rates, then you don't have to feel like an imposter when you ask for a rate that's higher than you've ever charged for before. Because if you have the experience to justify it and you know that it's an industry standard, then why not? I'll give you some numbers that I kind of know from my experience are how it looks right now, but these may change in the future. So go to places like salary.com, ziprecruiter.com, and glassdoor.com and look up video editor rates. Entry-level editors start anywhere from 12 to 15 an hour. If you have a little bit of experience, you can start getting closer to 20. I have 8 years professional experience working with big ad agencies, as well as a lot of experience before that as a hobbyist. And I currently charge $50 an hour, and I'm looking to increase my rates potentially significantly in the next year. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a ballpark. But that $50 an hour is a very general ballpark that I give you so that you have an idea. It varies from client to client. If the client has a really, really big name and they have a big budget, I'm going to charge them more. If the client is small and has a small budget, but I care about what they're doing, I'm going to cut my rate significantly so that I can work with them because I think it'd be cool. It's up to you. You're obviously allowed to be flexible with the amount of money that you charge. It's also very important, though, after you compare to the numbers that I just gave you and whatever numbers you find on these websites in terms of rate or the income that you should expect, it's important to use that information to be confident in the rate that you're asking for and to be okay with rejection. You don't want to compromise so drastically on your choices that you make yourself unhappy. Now, like I said, I've never had a client not pay me or wait a year to pay me. I've heard some horror stories of some people who worked on a gig and were owed $6,000 to $10,000 and weren't paid for 8 months when they were supposed to be paid the day after the shoot. That's never happened to me. But what has happened to me is undervaluing myself. I've always been paid on time, but sometimes that payment was pretty cheap because I allowed myself to continue to work for employers and producers that were not paying me enough money. But I felt like I needed the gig. And you never want to be in that position. It's very, very smart to not put all of your eggs in one basket. Invest in multiple places, have multiple streams of income, at least from multiple different gigs as an editor. If not, have another job other than editing as you're transitioning into editing if you want to make editing your full-time thing. Give yourself the runway so that you don't have to take the crappy jobs. You don't have to take the super, super, super low-paying jobs, especially once you have a little bit of work underneath your belt. It's okay to be rejected because you have a good price sometimes, because there are people willing to pay your prices if you have the value equivalent. I would go to the student community and I would ask the instructors here, and I would also ask family and friends to look at your portfolio and compare the level of your current work with what you are asking for in terms of your general rates. You want to make sure that the rates that you're asking for when you're negotiating for gigs feel equivalent to the level of quality of your portfolio and your reel. You need to have the history behind you to prove that you are worth the amount of money that you're trying to charge. There's always this fun little conversation around who's going to drop the price first, right? Like, do you tell them your rate or do you ask for their budget? Typically, I like to know their budget first. My rate differs from project to project, depending on the scope of the project, depending on the needs, depending on a lot of factors. I will drastically change how much I'm charging. So really, I don't have a standard rate that people can refer to, but people really want to know a standard rate. Oftentimes, people will have a project or something that they want edited in the back of their minds, and they just want to evaluate whether or not it'll even be possible. And so I'll get Instagram DMs regularly of people asking me what my rate is, and I refuse to give it because I don't know. If you're making a short film that I think is super cool and I want to be involved and I want my name in the credits, I'm not going to charge you very much. But if you're doing like corporate marketing and you clearly have a very big marketing budget, then I'm going to charge you what I'm worth. So you don't necessarily need to be closed off and withholding about your rate, but you also just want to be clear that there's no reason to give them a rate if you don't understand the context. It's much more important that you understand the full context of what it is that they're trying to do. And by the time you understand the full scope of who they are and what they're offering, you're going to know a lot more clearly the kind of rate that you should be requesting anyway, even if they don't give you an actual budget number. But of course, as part of all of your questioning to try to understand the scope, asking what the budget is, both the total budget and the budget for you, the editor, is extremely helpful because then you can have some ballparks to know what to deal with in order to know what rate to counter with. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who drops the number first. You just want to make sure that you're getting paid a price that you think is fair. And based on everything that I just talked about in this course and doing some research for yourself on those websites that I listed and other places and gut checking with family and friends, you should have the information that you need to have a valid price to charge. It is wise to sign contracts where you can. I am still learning contract law in terms of writing my own contracts to send to contractors that I would like to work with. However, I have signed quite a few contracts that were written for me. Most clients that you're going to work with, if they're big enough to have a budget for a video editor, they're probably big enough to have spent the time to invest in their legal and make sure that they're doing everything correctly. And they will probably have crew deal memos that they are going to ask you to sign. Again, can't give you legal advice here. Generally speaking, though, a crew deal memo shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary. It should basically say, we, the company, are agreeing to hire you, the contractor, at a certain rate for a certain amount of time on this specific project. It will probably include some legalese about how you are work for hire and that you do not own the copyright to the work that you are creating. Instead, you are creating work that the company will own the copyright to. There might be some stuff about using your image for their behind the scenes stuff. There might be some non-disclosure agreements. There might be some liability waiving where if you're injured on set or if you have complaints or issues that you agree to waive the liability and that they are not responsible. Pretty self-explanatory, common sense stuff you might expect to be there. If stuff starts feeling weird, if the contract seems, if the contract is more than a few pages long, if the contract is overly restrictive, if the contract seems to be demanding more of your rights or your autonomy than you think it should be, trust your gut. Trust the red flags. We cannot provide you legal counsel here. We cannot answer questions related to whether or not a contract is good. We can be a gut check. We can say, yeah, that seems sus, or yeah, that seems fine. That's about as much as we can do. So it might be good to find yourself a lawyer or an attorney if you're worried about legal contracts. But as long as the contracts seem within the normal scope of basically other contracts that you've hired just within this creative editing scope, you should be fine. The last thing to setting up a gig is, this isn't always possible, but I usually want either a signed deal memo or a deposit up front. One of the two. I think this alone by itself is one of the very biggest factors as to why I haven't been screwed over financially like some of the people that I know. If a potential client has to make a contract and sign it, or if they have to put their money where their mouth is and pay you money that they do not get back, that is not refundable, they are much more likely to be serious and much more likely to be able to pay you. If they sign the contract and you do a bunch of work and they don't follow through, I'm pretty sure that means you have grounds to sue them. And if you do a bunch of work and then they don't give you the final payment, well, they sunk a bunch of money in that they don't get back. And so you've been at least partially compensated already. So it's pretty much standard at this point that I need either a signed contract or a deposit before I'll begin working on the project. And that deposit should be communicated as non-refundable, and it should be a significant portion of the total anticipated fee. If you're doing hourly, then you should calculate the rough number of hours and do 25 to 30% of the rough hours needed. If you're doing a flat rate, then 25 to 30, maybe even 40% of that total. Basically, you can flex with that percentage just following your gut, depending on how much you trust the person or the organization and how likely you think they are to follow through. If you really don't trust them, well, maybe don't take the gig at all. But if you don't trust them entirely, but you still think it's a gig worth taking, then just make that upfront deposit significantly more. I mean, 50% upfront is not unheard of. I've done it quite a bit in the past, actually.